Ladies and gentlemen, it's a great pleasure to welcome you here at the ICC for this quite a special for us, at least, event. Thank you for taking the time out of your life to come and listen about the value and worth of heritage. We all know that heritage plays an important part in our lives, in our society, in our economics. But have you ever tried to go deeper than this general statement? Have you ever tried to find whether there is any real proof that it is such an important thing in our life, or as before, you are just content with the fact that it's a general thing that we all know, but we don't need even to prove it. In our project that we are doing with Europa Nostra, with Catholic University in Leuven, English Heritage Alliance, Heritage Europe and NCAT, and which is kindly supported by the European Union via Culture Program, we have asked these very questions. What is heritage worth? What is the impact of heritage on culture, on Europe, on environment, on economics, on society? We wanted to know in our project, we want to find the existing evidence that there is something to prove our assumption, our hypothesis that we put in the title of our project, which is Cultural Heritage Counts for Europe. And today we want to ask our experts, our panelists, this very question. Is cultural heritage so important for Europe? What is its value? What is the worth of heritage? And let me start by introducing our tonight's experts, starting with the one that came from the farthest to us, which is Mrs. Kate Pugh. She is the Chief Executive of Heritage Alliance. She's based in the UK, which is a country well known for researching the subject of the impact of cultural heritage and the cultural heritage value. And then we have Mr. Peter Inkei, who is the director of Budapest Observatory in Hungary, who is working with us on this project and was trying to help us prove that there is some research in Hungary that heritage is important in our lives, in our society and economics. Then we have Mr. Christian Potiron, who is the Deputy Program Manager of Pilsen 2015, the next year European Capital of Culture, who will hopefully introduce some social view, some social perspective into our discussion. And last but not least, our Krakow's very own Monika Murzyn-Kupisz, who is one of the few really in Poland experts who researches the links between heritage and economics. And my first question to our distinguished guest would be exactly this. What is heritage worth? And what are the values that are associated with cultural heritage in their respective countries? What is the association, the first association that comes to people's and decision makers' mind when it comes to cultural heritage? Maybe we'll start with Kate again. Sorry to
That's all right.
make you the
That's all right. No, I'm happy to go first. Well, I need to say that I'm a very practical person, and you're all academics, so you'll just have to bear with me. I'll do my best. But I think from where I stand, the value of heritage is fundamental in the UK, and my organisation, the Heritage Alliance, is actually the advocate. What we do is we're the voice of the independent heritage sector. So we're not a government organisation, we're an umbrella body for all the independent heritage groups in England, and believe me, there are a lot, about 6,000 we reckon. And between them they have about 6.3 million members, trustees, friends, staff and so on. So it's a huge social movement in England, the heritage movement, and we act as the voice. What we want to do is to create a framework which realises the benefits of heritage for government, for communities and for individuals. And to do that, we need your research. So for me, the value of heritage is really important because that's what we're pushing towards government all the time. And so how we estimate the value is crucial. We need the statistics. So I can tell you that heritage in the UK is worth 2% of national GDP. I can tell you the link between heritage and tourism, it's worth over 26 billion a year. And I can also tell you that visiting a heritage site is worth over £1,600 to an individual, but engaging in sport is only worth 900. So there we have a competitive advantage. But the point of saying all that is that obviously we need context, we need robust statistics, we need to know that they're timely, because we need them when we want to make a particular point. We need to be able to access them. So just to say that we need really to estimate why we want the statistics and also how we get the statistics. It's not just enough to say what they are, we need the narrative behind them. And so in England, I think there are two ways that we value heritage. First, in our heritage protection regime, well, we have listed buildings, and those are listed in grades 1, 2, 2 star, in terms of their architectural and historic value. That's a system that's been running for about 60 years. But now we have local lists gaining ground, so the significance is more local than national. And more recently, in the last 2 years, we've got assets of community value. So the assets that are valued by the communities are now gaining ground against the assets that are graded or categorized by the academics. And that's been a really big shift. And I think that's also reflected in the other way that we estimate values, and that's the academic research, which is extremely valuable for us. We have a huge industry in the UK valuing heritage. It's driven by many things which we'll come to later, but we look at participation, we look at personal development, we look at well-being and health, community values, the economic contributions obviously, and its role in shaping distinctive and prosperous places. And mostly that's about community identity, so there again we get the community aspect as well. We have some weak areas. Do you want to talk about the weak areas, or should I talk about that later?
Yeah.
Okay, well, weak areas I think are, we're quite good on the instrumental values, that's the economic, the social, environmental and the cultural, but we're not very good on the aesthetic values. I think what's happened is that we're not very good about talking about beauty. My background is in history and economics, and I'm much better at talking about economics than I am about talking about beauty. I haven't got the vocabulary. Some people are very good at it, but I'm not. So I think on the intrinsic values we're a bit weak. And then I think we're a bit weak on the other side, the life satisfaction side. I don't think we do that very well. And the other side, I think, is the institutional side, the value of the organisations that I represent.
Monica Kate said that, well, there's so much lacking still in the UK. What is your perspective? Do you think that, because comparing to the UK, the Polish case, there's not much research done, and what do you think is the most important association, most important value that is associated with cultural heritage in Poland right now?
First of all, I have to say that from the academic perspective, when I try to research who researches values of heritage, UK is absolutely #1. So whatever is done there has been the great inspiration, I think, for studies done all over the world, even if you find some voids in research still. I would say I would distinguish between two things, that is the needs, my personal opinions as an academic, and the perception of heritage which is dominating in the country, in this case in Poland, which may be three different things. And I would start with saying that in the kind of popular and traditional discourse on cultural heritage, and that's very deeply ingrained in thinking about heritage and monuments, particularly in Poland, we, as citizens, let's say, are still thinking very often about the cultural, artistic, and historic values.
Quite the opposite.
And this is quite, although it's very hard to define them. I'll get to that in a second. And if there is a second set of values which has been very often underlined, this is the national and ideological, which has been underlined in the 19th century, the interwar period, and after World War II. Now, if we look from a broader perspective, what values might heritage have, next would be, well, maybe it's attractive to tourists. So that's another dimension that has been noticed, especially after 1989. Now, the problem which I see, looking as an academic and looking at this popular perception, is that I believe there are many more values to heritage than just artistic, cultural, touristic, and ideological. And that very often they are not underlined enough to justify why we should take care of heritage. Why am I saying this? I'm saying this because in some perhaps less famous, more peripheral communities, there may be some heritage sites or maybe some immaterial heritage values which will never become great heritage attractions, which are not artistically top 100 of the world, yet there are reasons and there are important reasons why they should be maintained, preserved, made available, etc., etc. And then we get to this much broader array of values we can speak of. For example, the question of social values, the question of local pride that they engender, the question of whether and how they inspire creativity in people, the question of how these sites may enable development of links, of bonding, of social capital. The question how these sites may be used, for example, in the process of regeneration. So this gives us a much broader array of values we can think of. I haven't mentioned also that, also from the economic perspective, of course, economists, and this is kind of classic thinking of cultural economics, distinguish between cultural and economic values, but within economic values there are use values, direct use values, non-direct use values, and there are non-use values such as the bequest value or the option value or the existence value. And of course, two things that are important. The first thing is that very few local governments, officials are aware of such a broad array of values. And the second problem is how to measure them, because obviously the further away we move from market transactions, the harder it is to actually estimate what heritage is worth. This is also the question of who values, who performs valuation. And maybe I should also distinguish, because when you started, you said you treat as synonymous impact and valuation, and I can see them as two different things. So, so this also depends on who undertakes valuation and the context of valuation and the level of valuation. For example, local, regional, national, or maybe global, if we speak of the World Heritage Sites, for example. And I guess my main argument, I've recently completed my second degree in economics, writing about heritage and local development. My argument is actually that we should look at different levels, different stakeholders. We should use both qualitative and quantitative analysis. And last but not least, we should look at these different spheres of impact, and only then we get a very complex picture. But then, getting back to practice, this may be very costly, time-consuming, and the methods are not well developed yet, so we have a big problem.
Well, definitely that's the problem that we have all been speaking about today during our steering committee meeting as well. And I was wondering what's the situation in Hungary, because I know that Central Europe in general is not very well known for research in cultural heritage impact. Do you think that in Hungary, what is the association with cultural heritage? Is it the aesthetic value, the national value, or maybe it is starting to be the economic value that people think of when they start to work with heritage or try to get a grant for some heritage project?
Exactly. This was the most important motive lately to get the grant, that is, get a share from the structural fund, because before that, before the European structural funds came in, there was not such nationwide, large-scale strategic investment on the maintenance of built heritage before. But this was such an injection, such a huge new resource, that there was a competition where every owner or stakeholder of a heritage item was encouraged to show the economic, or very strictly the touristic benefit. So on the surface, the first thing that you think of a heritage item monument, for example. Nowadays, it is what is the impact in tourism terms. But really, in the depth, in the background, what is important is the symbolic value. And Hungary is still searching its identity, because just 5 minutes on that, no, 5 sentences maybe. So because we still remember, we are told that Hungary was a successful medieval kingdom. And then came the Ottoman Empire and swept out almost everything, including great heritage. It was different from the Balkanic countries, where there was some kind of settlement within the Ottoman Empire. In Hungary, it was just a military area. So we were wiped out. I mean, the buildings were wiped out, the people were wiped out from most of the country. And then came the Habsburgs, who sent out, expulsed the Turks, but they became the dominant culture and nation. So much so that in the 18th century, or in the beginning of the 19th century, it was not sure whether Hungary will follow the Irish way and give up the language and become a German language nation. But somehow there was a renaissance like elsewhere in Eastern Europe, absolutely very successful. As successful as for Galicia, that you can see downstairs in this exhibition. That was a glorious period, jointly with the Austrians. We Hungarians were the strong guys in this empire. And now, what for Hungary brings tourism connected to heritage is mostly those buildings that were erected in Budapest in the past, in the turn of the previous century. So that is something, a very important stock. But then came the trauma of the First World War, when everything was lost. Hungary became a small country, an insignificant country. And then came the Second World War, when we became a communist colony. Then cultural heritage was unimportant, even alienated. The religious heritage, which is an important part of, was absolutely devalued symbolically, and also there was very little spent on it. So that is the heritage, and now Hungary is coming out and trying to challenge all this. Whether we still we are building on nostalgia, or we are becoming like Estonia, a very modern, forward-looking nation. So this is something which is going on as an experiment, and it affects the heritage. This is why I say that heritage in Hungary is symbolically linked to this search of identity.
Well, I think it could be the...
And we are very poor in research.
Yeah.
So if you ended with your weak points, I say that our weak point is that we are very weak on numbers.
Yeah. Well, I think it's the case from what I've seen in many countries of Central Europe, and this problem of valuing heritage as of entering the European Union, valuing heritage in terms of economics, is visible in Poland as well, because when we had the chance to get the EU grants, we started to think how to actually explain to the EU, because structural funds are given only for those projects that foster development of regions and social cohesion and this kind of issues. So we need to think, if we wanted to restore heritage, how to actually explain and how to actually present the value, the economic value of heritage. And for us, it's also just a couple of years in the EU that is more research done in this aspect. And Christian, I was wondering, because you are French, as I suppose, but you have vast experience in Central European countries, and do you think there is a difference between looking at heritage in France and in Slovakia or the Czech Republic?
Yeah, of course, there is a big difference. I think I would say also, because if I take the main value for me of heritage is, before everything, identity, and this quest for identity. Like France is not so much the question to themselves, maybe it's starting again, because we are in the need of redefining what is, in this multicultural world, what is France and what is French identity. But I've been spending now more than 10 years in Slovakia, so I know the story of Central Europe from the other side of the Hungarian border, where the quest for identity is the main reason why you deal with cultural heritage. And I would say sometimes, okay, also in France it's kind of, in a way it's very sometimes misused or used for the official discourse, for helping the national cohesion. I mean, everybody learned the story of Napoleon, even if it was a totalitarian emperor, but nobody is dealing with that question because it's just part of the official history, and you need to be proud of Napoleon, even if there is not what to be proud of. If we would put it in a modern context, it wouldn't be much better than Stalin or Hitler, in a way. But this is not possible debate in France, for instance. Like there is plenty of things which are building the national story and which are important. While in Slovakia we are in a young country, in a very quickly moving Central European zone where we live the transition of communism. So they live these two changes in the same time, like this building the national identity and this communist transition. And the nice story I heard from Hungarians seen from the Slovak side is also really interesting. And I always meet the stories about cultural heritage in Slovakia dealing with middle-age roots of Slovak identity in Nitra, which is even a kingdom which is not clear which was Slovak or Czech, but doesn't matter. And then there is kind of cut. Then you don't speak about Slovak history for several centuries because it's part of Hungarian history, and then you refuse. You know, like this kind of selective memory. You choose what part of the history you want to use or not. While I'm always fighting when dealing with Slovaks that there is very much this need of rehabilitation of many parts of the history. I mean, heritage is also made of these conflictual kind of things. Living in Serbia for a while also, everywhere this heritage question it's able to put people together around identity, but it's also able to put people against each other. So it's something which is important in the work. Then in France is the first world tourist destination. So for sure, there the economical value is very clear, and the state is making a lot of money also on that question. And I have the tendency to think that in Central Europe there is too much this desire to just follow the same model, like to desire to be Paris, Venice, and my good friend or my colleague from working in Venice and in Marseille is also very often telling me the stories of how Venice is sometimes for local inhabitants awful, like how hard it is to be fitting with the city where you are living, because tourists are coming, millions of tourists are coming, telling you the story of medieval Venice, but they don't care about the 20th and 21st century story of Venice and how the people are really living. So I think that's for me really a fight that heritage is not just first the thing of the state. I'm really like, even if I'm working for a European capital of culture, which is very often a tool for city development and for nice discourse about culture, but I really think we should take the cultural heritage out of the golden prison of states and public affairs, because it's provocation in a way, but it's also because there is a lot of money put in heritage for a constructing building, and then there is much money leaking sometimes for that the people feel that the heritage is also their everyday life, the codes that they are using every day. I'm really very often promoting history of communism as part of the valuable part of the history of those countries, of suburbs as a rich part of the cities that we should promote. In Košice, where I've been living and doing the European Capital of Culture in 2013, I mean, it's 80% of the city in terms of territory, in terms of inhabitants, and we want to make the discourse on the city on the small 3-4 streets in the city center. I can imagine in Krakow, I'm not an expert of Krakow, but I know it's from my few visits that actually you make 3 turns of the main square and few streets around, and most of the tourists doesn't know any other stories about Krakow. And I'm very sad of that, because I really think there is much more to say about cultural heritage in Central Europe than the medieval or older part of the history, but the younger part of the history is also valuable. and the benefit should not be, the economical and social benefit should not be just for the state or for the private sector, because also one of the problems is privatization, of course, of those topics. And when I see the mass tourism in Prague city center, I'm just amazed also by sometimes it's complicated to protect heritage in Central Europe. And that it should be also something which is shared with inhabitants, and they should define also what is valuable for them.
Yeah, I think we should come back to that, because I know you have a nice case, nice project dealing with the social value, let's say, or the use of cultural heritage by inhabitants, not by tourists or not by investors. So I think we should hear about it. But firstly, I would like to come back for a moment to Katie, because you quoted quite a lot of numbers, and everybody who are in need of numbers, like we are many times in Central Europe, could be envious that you have those numbers, and we can't calculate them yet, or we are not doing it for different reasons. And I was wondering, who is actually commissioning those numbers? Who is looking for the data and why? And what is the use of the data once you get it?
Right. Well, yes, we do have lots of numbers, but as I've just said, numbers are no good without a narrative behind it, you know? And also on the other side, you need the political will to accept those numbers. Otherwise, you just get into an argument about numbers, and that's not really very productive, as we found out with our Treasury recently. What makes England or UK so prolific in its research on numbers? Well, I think there's actually quite a few things here. One is, of course, if you're arguing with government, you do need numbers, because the government itself argues in those terms, and it monetizes most things. So it reduces everything to pounds or euros or whatever, because that's the basic common currency, and you need to compare. We can tell you that apparently visiting heritage sites saves the National Health Service 20 billion a year. I really can't believe that. Anyway.
And who came out with this?
I'd have to check that one for you, but it is an interesting one, because that's comparing two industries. That's quite interesting. So what drives this? Well, yes, the government needs figures. So they need figures really to inform its policies and decisions. And since 1997, we have had more emphasis on evidence-based policy making. That doesn't mean to say that the government believes it if it's not appropriate or they don't like it, you know. But that's what we're meant to be doing. We do also have a very strong civic engagement tradition, and we believe in democratic change. So if we want to take on the government, we have to fight in their terms, and that's usually in numbers. We have a huge charitable sector in the UK, all competing for funds. And we have a lot of trusts and foundations, and they will want to see impact assessments, evaluation, to make sure that their money is being properly used. And then we have three main public sources of support. And one is the Heritage Lottery Fund, which we're very, very fortunate to have. The National Lottery, since 1994, has heritage as one of its good causes, and it's invested some 6 billion over the last 20 years. And our heritage looks a lot better for that, I have to say. So that's a huge amount of statistics that they need, because they need to evaluate that they're using the public money. It's not government money, it's public people's money, but they need to evaluate that they're using it in the right way. And to design their new programs, and to make sure that heritage stays as one of the good causes, of course. That's very important. Secondly, we have English Heritage, which is the government agency, and it has a huge research program as well. Not as big as it was, but still very, very valuable. And that's they have a post which is head of socio and economic research. That's one of their posts in their shrinking staff list. Very important. And then lastly, we have the universities, and they have a budget. Well, there's the Arts and Humanities Research Council, which is where culture sits, and they have a budget of 100 million at the moment. And that's very important, because we have a theme under that called Care for the Future, and that's funding a lot of research. So we are very fortunate that we do have that amount of resource being put into our heritage. Also, I have to say on the fact that you're saying that a lot of the research comes from the UK, I think we do have to say that our higher education actually attracts a huge amount of international students, and their research is really important. And secondly, I think that English being the lingua franca for heritage means that a lot is published in English. So, you know, I just say that as a sort of reservation on statistics. So that's why I think England is ahead, and we have been campaigning on heritage for a very long time.
Well, why do you think Europe is not following your example, actually?
I couldn't possibly say.
That's an interesting question. I mean,
well, I don't know. That's for you to tell me. I'd be very interested to know.
well, we were speaking, and I had several hypotheses, and one of them would be the different approach towards market economy, with more social approach, and well, different approach towards patronage over arts in continental Europe versus the UK. Although it's just a hypothesis, that's quite interesting. Why it's so different in both countries. They were both sides of the English Channel.
Well, the voluntary sector in England jumps in when government is too slow, which
Maybe
it frequently is,
that's what it is.
or they get frustrated, you know, and they raise the money and they have the enthusiasm. And I do think it is in our DNA, actually, because there is a figure that says British people visit heritage sites so many % more than the European norm. And we have been doing it for hundreds of years, whether it's Stonehenge or whatever. So I don't know about that. But I do think the voluntary sector is strong, and its campaigning nature. We need the information. We've always needed it.
Well, Monica, do you think that it's changing in Poland? I mean, is the academic world more interested in the research, or is the, I don't know, investors, government, somebody interested in that kind of research? I mean, also vis-a-vis the structural funds being spent in Poland and seeing the results of it measured in some way?
Well, I would say any attempt at measuring the impact of heritage is quite new in Poland, and there have been only a few. That's one thing that we may say. The second thing is that surely the fact that there are various projects supported with EU funds or Norwegian funds, you need some evidence to show that the project has been completed, basically. So this motivates many, particularly in the context of Poland, regional governments to commission studies. These studies are, of course, of very different quality, I would say, because, and this is my personal experience as well, very often they are done in a great rush to provide evidence. This means no time to do real research, both quantitative and qualitative, and very often they use very basic indicators which you can find in the statistical office, which are not, there are not too many. But nonetheless, I have to say that in my research, I participated in a few such projects, and this was quite interesting to me that they were commissioned at all, that's first of all, and that this was a sort of first step. The problem that we encountered while doing such project was, first of all, lack of data, because conventional statistical data were not useful at all. And the second thing was that even when our commissioning bodies agreed that we can do both economic impact studies and then kind of sociological qualitative studies, then they said, oh, very interesting results, and then they put the results on the shelf. So this has changed absolutely nothing. For example, in the way structural funds are evaluated. And this was a big problem for me, that in fact we have a new programming perspective, but I can assure you that in this programming perspective we'll have the same indicators, which are as meaningless as they were before, such as a number of square meters or number of visitors, which tells you, it does tell you something, but it's not the whole story, obviously. So it's on the one hand perhaps lack of people who would be doing this. When I was doing one of these projects 3 years ago with my colleagues, we had no examples to refer to in Poland. But the second thing is it's that actually even if there are some methods, they are not applied. On the other hand, as was mentioned before, I think the fact that there are EU funds motivates many local authorities, regional authorities, etc., to undertake projects, and then they have to justify not only why they spend EU funds, but why they chipped in with the local funds, because they have to chip in with about a quarter of the sum, which is very sizable for some municipalities. So this has started a discourse on why is heritage important in a certain way. Of course, the problem is also if you do a study and it proves that the project was absolutely bad, it was not needed to anyone, not useful, etc., etc. And yes, it has happened. But obviously, it was completed. So officially, it's completed. It satisfied all the indicators. But let's say the local community hates it, doesn't use it, etc., etc. So these may be the problems. On a more bright note, I would say that I've been doing some projects in recent 2 years on museums, and I can say that those heritage institutions which are ahead of others, which are more imaginative, active, and they kind of can feel that they make a difference by installing changes in the way they function. They also conduct a lot of investments. Then they really need the evidence. They need the evidence to convince themselves that they are going in the right direction, but they also need evidence vis-à-vis their funding bodies, because of course EU funding exists, but once a particular project is completed, it stops. So it's a question of saying, look, we have done only one stage of the project, support us with local money, support us for the second, third stage, for example. So, this is one of these things. Sometimes also, I've had a case when for purely academic reasons, I've conducted an exercise of measuring impact of some heritage restoration projects, and 2 years later, I was approached by a regional conservator who said, I badly need your data because we we established a certain protection form over an area, and now developers want to destroy all of this. So I need evidence, and I was very happy as an academic because you always feel you're just writing and nothing, it's useless basically. So it was very nice because then I knew that this data were brought to the table when there were negotiations whether this, in Polish law it's called cultural park, which is a protected area, a larger ensemble of buildings or cultural landscape, and this was used as an argument. So I think conservation authorities need these arguments, NGOs need these arguments, heritage institutions need these arguments, and also local governments begin to need these arguments, because even if we have, let's say, a local mayor or let's say cultural department convinced that they want to do some project, they now increasingly need to justify why this project is completed or why they are doing this project to the general public. And the general public is not well informed, to say the least. Yes, we may say that in Central and Eastern Europe we love heritage because we're very attached to identity and history. But when it comes to practical things like spending money or maybe devoting your time to volunteer or other things, we are not so interested in heritage at all. We'd rather have a very nice plumbing and gas lines and motorways and a few other things other than heritage. So I think increasingly local authorities will also need this to say, look, in the longer perspective, because this is also the question, how do we measure this? Long temporal perspective or short perspective? And this gives us different answers as well. So that's another problem. Of course, the results may also be very well instrumentalized by different bodies, which is again quite a challenge, I would say. The same result may mean different things depending on how we interpret it. What I see also, I think, in Central Europe is increasing number of academic projects or academic and governmental projects. I was looking if Gabor Sos is here, but no, he's not yet here. But there is a project called Revealing the Economic and Social Potentials of Cultural Heritage, called Herman. Which is conducted, among others, by Hungarian colleagues, but also by some people from here. There is also a project done by ICOMOS Poland in cooperation with some partners from Italy and from Lithuania, which is called Smart Value, and it's about attempts at definition of values, because this is also an important area, not only for economic reasons, but also for conservators. For example, we have in Poland also an increasing challenge of justifying why a certain property is inscribed in the monument register. If we were here 100 years ago, no, not 100 years ago, let's say in 1920s, you just inscribe a property and say it's historic and beautiful and it's a church from medieval ages. Case closed, it's inscribed. Today, you have to prove, and you have to, and even for conservators, it's very important, ask for outstanding universal value on the international level. So I also see that conservators begin to be interested in how to explain these values to the general public.
Also, it's quite a positive trend to see, if you think that that research is important, that well, that there is such changes in Poland, but I was also wondering, because we speak very little when we speak about researching, we speak very little about local communities and society. We turn to tourists, we turn to investors very often, and somehow I get the feeling, although maybe I'm an economist myself, so maybe that's why I have a different perspective, but I get this lack of community approach, maybe apart from certain studies, maybe in the UK, as you say, the society is more stronger there. And I was thinking, Christian, you are doing so many projects exactly for that, because Monika said that there are projects, that could be projects that make no sense. They meet the indicators, the money was spent, and there's no other choice but to say it was a success. But society might not really need it. And I was wondering, what do you think, from your experience, what are the projects that in cultural heritage that society does need, or local communities need? And well, you've done some of them, I think, in Košice and now in Pilsen as well. Would you tell us something about that?
Yeah. In a way, I mean, the notion of participation sounds good in Western Europe. In Central Europe, it's always a little bit more complicated story. After communism, I mean, I really often find in the situation of this need of rehabilitation of this notion of participation. What does that mean? That together we'll do something for the civic or for the need of the community? Like really after a revolution, this tendency to get back in the private sphere and to put the private sphere as the first things, the priority. Then it's a long work, a long process to bring back people to do something for free, like as a volunteer, or either to take care of the public space beyond the block of flats, or so like it's a long way. It's not something just happening, and we just need to change the focus. Like UK is in that way a long heritage and years of practices, but I think. I try always to see things as in terms of potential, and I really believe that there is so big potential in Central Europe in this heritage. Maybe we don't speak about Louvre and other big buildings, but in terms of stories which are not yet explored, that I believe are nowadays extremely interesting for visitors. Like we speak about tourism, economists usually focus really much on mass tourism because they need big figures. I'm more dealing on social economy, on those small scales economy, which actually can be part also of the heritage process and be part of the tourism economy. But they are very often not so much mapped, or that we will map how much people slept in the hotel, but who is mapping how many people were sleeping in Airbnb or couch surfing, or it's like there is this mobility exists in different ways. We usually focus on the tourism which brings the biggest value, kind of. In Košice, really for me, also like the European Capital of Culture usually focus on big cultural project, 1 year festival, but there are different ways to do that. You can also say that you can focus the European Capital of Culture on the long-term transformation of the city. And then if you want to do that, you need first to map the assets, to map the identity of the city or of the communities where you are functioning. In Košice, we are in the situation of a post-industrial city, a steel city with mine and steel industry, and a lot of suburbs around the city where actually the public services were to the citizens were really decreasing after the revolution. And we really worked on reusing the industrial heritage and like, let's say, the building of technical heritage, I would say. So in the middle of the block of flats, we were refurbishing 8 heat exchanger stations, which are all the technical buildings, small buildings under the block of flats, and created a new network of community art centers, which were really, we were giving the key of the community art center to the community. It's not, again, the system where I have the program for them, but they create the program answering to their need. And then there, usually the cultural heritage is the basic motor. Like it's the question that is dealing with identity. So you map with them what are the assets. You explore the asset with them. I remember a very interesting project in Košice dealing with the documentary theater about stories about people working in the steel company, community walk around, or really working on the outdoor gallery in the block of flats facades. So like it was a long-term process of really kind of empowering the inhabitants, also inputting the question what your suburbs, what your quarter identity is, and what you want to say about it. Like also on the European Capital of Culture, you expect a large numbers of visitors, of tourists, and usually this is a good opportunity. I use it often as an opportunity, saying, okay, they will come next year. What do you want to tell them? Or will you host them? Which kind of hospitality program you have prepared? So like in Košice, at least it worked like that. In Pilsen now we have, for me, even a step forward in that, in cooperation with the Council of Europe and the Faro Convention, which is for me kind of one of the documents which helped me in my everyday work, like which is really about this share of social and economical benefits of cultural heritage for the society and for the citizens. We are now developing an alternative guide of the city through application, where actually the story, there is 9 point of view on the history of the city according to 9 personages, which are 9 types of inhabitants. So the point of view of the workers from Škoda factory, the point of view of the young architect, the point of view of the young hip-hop dancer, the point of view of the children 12 years old, and there are a selection of many stories which are collected in this map, where people can, there is this collecting of stories. So maybe it's not the academic exploration of those stories, but for me it's very important because those are the things which we lack for the moment in Central Europe, maybe some of the stories, like keeping the stories of the past that will disappear also.
So what would be the success of that? I mean, what would be the impact, or what would be the success for you if that project, what the projects end, when the project ends?
So just to an application, a map, but for me there is also a work on the family photography collection. So it's more the collection part and how to make it accessible to the visitors. But then for me, like there is all the work around the heritage walks, so run by the inhabitants. So it means for certain number of inhabitants deciding, identifying in their suburbs interesting points, places which are closed, or stories which might be interesting. I think tourism today it's more experiential. People want authentic stories. I'm not interested personally anymore by seeing monuments. I see, maybe because I grew up in an environment where there are lots, so I'm really enjoying the authentic stories. And in that case, the people, they create their own stories about their suburbs. And for me, of course, there is 2 ways to evaluate it. One is we will also after a while put the things, the community, the heritage walk will be available for tourists, so we can evaluate how many of them we sell, and how many we sell also in the city, like in Czech language and in foreign language. But of course, you evaluate also the process, so they put the story together. It means about a group of people that are dealing with the history, with their memory, that they decide to put a story. It's their story, it's maybe not the official one, maybe it's not an objective one. Also, it's important to always let this space for disagreements, like they even between themselves sometimes are not agreeing. So, I mean, this process is for me as much valuable as the economical sustainability of the project itself.
Yeah, the influence on the way how they feel about their own stories, how they feel about their own identity, their connection with the city, their involvement. Finally, you said it's so difficult to involve people in any community work in our region, and it's true for some, well, for certain reasons. So it would be a success if you have a number of people who actually want to do something for the community. And
I think it's not so complicated in the region to involve the people. I think the people have the stereotype that it's complicated to involve the people in the region, and they don't try.
Yeah,
but if you break these first things, when they try it, they just want it more. They just believe that it can be as in UK. You know, the dream is just
to be as the UK.
No, the grass is always, for a French person, it's hard to say. The grass is always greener at the So we have quite green grass also in France. But anyway,
they have brain for that.
Yeah, that's an important factor. Actually, that is quite an important factor, because our weather is so dreadful. It does make us very, very dependent on our cultural heritage for tourism.
Yeah, if it wasn't for the heritage, who would come for the weather is not that might be worse. So I was wondering if what do you think would change in well, is heritage research in terms of impact or value of heritage important in Hungary? Do you think something would change in the attitude?
No, it's less and less important. Actually, the actual government is very self-assured, so they really know what to do.
They don't need any proof, any
Not
research?
Not really, and if they do, they have the means for the research and for the results. But, I must also say that, well, Hungary is now a divided nation to a large extent, which makes it more difficult to reach what you used two words. You said that if the government fails, then the civil society jumps. And then you said that there is enthusiasm. Now this, I think, now jumping and enthusiasm, this is something so different. However, can I tell briefly about two and a half success stories still in the field?
If success, yes.
Yes. Now, one is connected to intangible heritage, and that's the Hungarian tradition of dance houses, which was an absolutely grassroots civic urban initiative in the 60s, still in the communist period, where people, students in Budapest, started to like the folk music of the peripheries of the Hungarian cultural circle, especially from Transylvania, which is the most traditional part. And they liked the tunes and they danced to it, so they spent their disco time by this kind of music, and this spread. And at the beginning, the authorities, the communist authorities, were oppressing, but then Hungary was a different, rather, how to say, cooperative kind of communism regime, so it co-opted. And it became accepted and even encouraged lately. And so much so that this is an official success story, because it became, what is the English word? Enlisted anyway, to the collection of UNESCO list of this is one of the Hungarian prizes. The other thing is quite new. That happened 3 years ago, and it was initiated by one association. In fact, it is connected to the Open Society Institute, but it was not an official, not a product of the institute, but the people who realized that their building was 100 years old. So they decided to arrange some commemoration to this. They collected the documents and they prepared an exhibition. And they thought that it would be more interesting to find partners. And they placed a call from their website for other buildings in Budapest, which were, it was in 14, that it was, no, it was 4 years ago, it was in 10, which were exactly 100 years old. And that became such a success that it still goes on. Now, I think it is the third year now?
I think it's more, and it's every April. And even more and more houses.
Yes, but it is the fourth year, I think. Okay,
yeah,
so, but it is still recent, and the thing is absolutely self-organized, self-governing, but a lot of enthusiasm is invested in it, with a huge coordinated website, and the people really come out in their houses. They are proud. Sometimes they don't even know that they are 100 years old and in the building, and and this is for one day, and then it is open and people walk around, and then you can go in and you say, an old lady comes out and they say that I am the oldest inhabitant, and so on. So this is a fantastic story, and I hope it will be seen from outside. And the half story I just mentioned is which is rather famous, but it is I think it is less authentic. It is the issue of the ruin pubs, or more or less. That is in some of the rundown districts of Pest, these shabby old buildings were turned into ramshackle pubs, karczmas, and they became absolutely very popular. Now Budapest is a mecca for young, especially English and Scandinavian young people to come and have 1 or 2 boozing nights, and they spend much of the time in these ruin pubs, which is something like a participatory use of heritage also.
Oh, I'm so glad we can end the discussion on such a positive note. That heritage is still important to local communities, even if we don't measure it so much. It's still something that is an important part of our lives. And we had, well, 4 different views, I would say, 4 different experiences. I was wondering if any of you would like to ask our guests any questions. Yeah, there you go.
Thank you so much for very, very interesting contribution. So we have here, my name is Neshka Kvadik-Mihalovic, I'm from Europa Nostra, Secretary General. We have here representative from important European countries, France, Poland, UK, Hungary. You have all somehow been touching upon the value for identity, for national identity, heritage. Now, we in Europa Nostra like to promote the idea that heritage in Europe also is important for developing a sense of European identity. You come from important countries with a strong sense of national identity. Do you think that that view of Europa Nostra is what Joanna perhaps was called a dogmatic approach of Europa Nostra? Or do you think that the narrative that indeed heritage could be used more in the whole new narrative for Europe that we have to develop, and that we need something more, an emotional link between Europeans, citizens and Europe, and that heritage tells not only the national story, but tells a European story. And I think this exhibition that we have just seen here in the International Cultural Center shows how much, in fact, the heritage can tell a European story that many of us do not know. So I would very much like to have the comment of you on that particular value of our heritage.
You touch upon a sensitive point of mine, because I think that Europa Nostra is not exploiting these chances enough, especially when I see the list of winners of the awards. Very often you just accept the local explanation and interpretation, which is in most cases that of the community which is now using it and which really invested money of recreating the heritage so that to be awarded. But there is little effort to express all the complexity of cultures and nations which was invested in it. And I'm not quoting examples, but often it is just the technical parts, the technical virtues, which is really emphasized. But what generations, what cultures are there embedded in the origin of this? This is usually little exploited.
So you encourage us to you don't think that it's dogmatic approach. On the contrary, you think that we are not using it sufficiently, the role of heritage for developing the
absolutely.
Thank you. I'm glad to hear that.
I'm quite interested in the ideology of this, because when the EU was set up, it was a very strong ideological movement for political union and monetary union. And as the past few years have seen, that sort of momentum has fallen away. And so what is the unifying, what unifies Europe? And I have a feeling that it is the cultural heritage. And I think with the new economies, the BRIC countries and so on, this tourism, and I have to say I'm slightly alarmed by the continual link between heritage and tourism. I think that's quite dangerous. To be so reliant on that. But having said that, Europe has huge cultural values, and I think also those cultural heritage values, I think they also transmit into social values. For example, in the UK, we think that the Houses of Parliament, Big Ben, which were shown all over the world during the Olympic Games and so on, show our sort of democratic principles, our stability, all those sorts of things. And I think that Europe could use those too for its own ends. That might be quite dangerous, but still.
Wonderful to hear that from UK.
Yes, we may not be Europe for long.
There is hope. There is hope after all.
Actually, I personally dislike being put in the situation I'm representing France or because I believe European identity is much more complex than a nationality, and I'm really convinced on that, and more. And it's maybe because of the way EU is also functioning, always referring on state deciding, that we are always coming back to this national organization of defining what is culture, what is cultural heritage, and I really prefer the city level, which, because also very often it needs to define its own identity, it has to be a multicultural definition of the identity. So then a city of Lyon, when dealing with its own identity, defining its patrimoine, it's not just about UNESCO city center, because then it wouldn't work, because the big suburbs of Lyon are full of people coming from different parts of the world. And then when they deal with defining their own cultural heritage and their identity, they have to include all that. And for me, this is Europe. This is much more than defining what typically French can be found in Lyon, because this is not European, it's very French. So kind of maybe this fight between this state level and this city level is important for me, and I really consider the support of EU in developing the city level of development of Europe. So for me it's really important, and it's up to the cities to not be just in city marketing, but also in this participatory approach of defining their identity, because there is also a lot of cities using cultural heritage just as city marketing tool. So it's of course something for me a little bit problematic. And another point is for me interesting, and for years I'm saying myself, why we are not investing so much in cross-border education in history. Like, it started a little bit in France, but like between Slovakia and Hungary, there is so much to do. I mean, they are sharing so much of same history, and they are not able to speak about their history. I mean, the cultural heritage of Hungary is also partly in Slovakia, and the cultural heritage of Slovakia is partly in Hungary, but they never speak about that together. They have their own stories separately.
But I think, on the other hand, after 1989, the political changes and tourism and market changes have enabled, and also return of local governance. I strongly support your view, that is, the emergence of regional and local, or re-emergence of local and regional governance has created a situation where, for whatever motifs, because it may be just marketing or attracting tourists, but maybe for other reasons as well, regions and municipalities are searching for what is unique in them. What is so special about us? What is so special about us for us? And what is so special about us for others? And this may mean that they don't really care about the national identity aspect, but they care what is so special. And in many cases, at least my research in Poland to some extent confirms that this has led to revaluation of heritage and rediscovering of some heritage. This may be rediscovering especially multicultural heritage, and the fact that so many cities in Poland now use this multicultural label, but they are very genuinely interested in also rediscovering what kind of nationalities, ethnicities, religions lived there once. Of course, it's easier when you don't have them side by side anymore. Timothy Garton Ash has written this already in the early 1990s, if I may quote him, that it's much easier to practice this, but this is a real trend. And if I may say this, for example, in Poland, this may be rediscovery of multi-ethnic, multi-religious identity of some cities, rediscovering that there were Jews living in some places, that there were German speakers, but there were Czechs and Hungarians and others. And this is, I think, very, very visible for whatever motifs. This, of course, may open up new questions. For example, are Vietnamese and others who are newcomers represented not as well as these historic minorities which we have? But I think it is a very interesting process. And to some extent, EU funds help in that, because many communities also obtain EU funds to do some cross-border projects together. And I think alongside Polish-German border, there are quite a few interesting projects. I don't know if you know some of the cities, but I had a privilege to be last year in a city called Gubin, for example, one of those cities cut by the border. And both sides of the city are doing a project together on restoring a ruined church tower and having a cultural center there, and it's actually a joint project of both sides of the border. So things like that also happen, because they know that they have to search for something unique to keep people there, because otherwise residents will be gone soon to larger metropolises, perhaps.
But maybe there is sometimes the conflict between looking for the unique and looking for the common. Which I don't have the answer to that, but it's always like every European capital of culture is always looking in what the city is unique. It's what you need to write there down and to say for years, oh, unique, you are compared with the other competitors. But sometimes it would have maybe even more sense to look for what we have in common. I'm for years saying that it would be maybe even more interesting to have European capital of cultures as pair that are winning, not as we have, two European capital of culture every year, but they are selected separately. And I'm saying that why? It would so much help in defining European identity to say you need to compete together and to look for what you have in common, not for, oh, you are unique in your own country, and then you finish with the flag type of European capital of culture where you want to show how much Slovak or how much whatever representing to you are. So,
well, of course, the uniqueness you're talking about may also mean that it's specialists from top-down approach defining what is unique somewhere and not the actual residents, which may treat what you think as special as dissonant and absolutely unacceptable. That may be the case as well. So sometimes I'm not convinced about this always searching for this European label for everything. I think local and regional will be more interesting sometimes.
It's possible. I wish to bring another point of view about France, because I think there is a national level around the head town of Paris. Yes, we have this history, but also you were speaking about the city, and I agree with you. But there is also a strong life about cultural heritage in the territories, and you were speaking about the local level, and something here is coming from the bottom up, and we have many experiences about this vision of cultural heritage coming from the communities. And I think for them, generally, the question of the national identity is not so strong now. Because for me, it's a vision we can find in some part of France, and it's links to some subjects. But in general, now people are very attached. There is a strong attachment to their local cultural heritage. And for this also, I think we need to have more links to the European level. But I think it's also linked to the question of education in our different countries. What is the importance of education about the history, of art, about the culture, and when we'll be able to do this, we'll be also able to speak in better words about Europe. But it's the next step.
Could I ask a slightly different question? Brian Smith, Heritage Europe Secretary General. We could say, what is heritage worth in terms of economic recession compared with economic growth? Is it different? Traditionally, we might argue, especially in Western Europe, no, probably not. Delete that bit. Generally, that heritage is seen economically as a cost, and a cost that predominantly falls on the public sector. And yet in economic recession, where GDP has been slashed, we're back at levels way, way below where we were. Which is why the European Union's strategy is about growth. It's trying to claw back, isn't it? So my question is there a need for a new sense of mindset about the worth of heritage and who pays? And I'm thinking here not just public sector, but private sector and voluntary sector.
You asked me.
I know, I'm asking you. Sorry, I'm just looking.
I'm happy to go.
No, but I think it's a very good question that was also raised somewhere when I was presenting our project, Culture Heritage Council for Europe. What happens with spending on cultural heritage and on culture as such in times of recession and crisis? And I think there is one misunderstanding about thinking about culture and cultural heritage as costs, because and maybe that is the lack of research proving that it's not only the cost, but it's the return on investment here. It's much bigger sometimes, or sometimes it could be overestimated as well, but it's bigger than the money put in cultural heritage and culture. But the problem is that if we want to monetize everything and we want to have the return on investment also in money, sometimes those numbers may not really match. We have to find a way to maybe put it also in numbers so it's more comparable, to show the other benefits, not only the benefits in terms of money, but in benefits of, I don't know, cultural stability, the stability, the fact that people feel safe. Also, with cultural heritage around them, I read a nice article about that, proving that we actually need that, and when we neglect protecting heritage in the times of crisis, maybe that is affecting also the attitude of people, the feeling of safety, their future. So I think that is the misunderstanding very common about talking about the recession and cutting on expenses on culture and cultural heritage. But it's not me who should be speaking; it's our guests. So.
I disagree with you, Brian, about the cost on the public sector. I think the cost is on the private owners. They're the ones that are the squeezed middle. and they're the ones that are funding the majority of our domestic buildings are actually the biggest proportion of our listed buildings, and they don't get any relief. When they were listed, when they were protected, there were some grants. Now there are no grants, and they have VAT at 20%, whereas it's 0 on demolition and new build. So they are carrying the cost for the national benefit because they're keeping up these buildings for us. So I take issue on that one, but we can fight about that later. But I think in times of recession, it's very important that heritage is put on the positive side of the balance sheet. That's what we're doing all the time, and using the research that's available to do exactly that. Of course it's difficult in times of recession. That's why I think that for the last 5 years we've been busy on the economic arguments. Now we're moving into the well-being and social cohesion arguments, and we have a general election next year, as you all know, and that's what our government will be fighting, the parties will be fighting on. So we need to adapt our arguments to that. I also think that, as we discussed today, there is this difficulty of the bias that we always expect the impact to be positive. And that's why it's so important that the research coming out of the universities to support our advocacy is credible and usually done by a third party. Because if we do it, the government will say, well, of course they will say that. So we need third-party research, preferably from the universities, to support our case.
Well, any other questions, comments?
Well, I think if I could add something, it's also that in Poland there's never been enough money, so this was never the case of plenty. So the discussions were always there. So it's more the case of making people aware of this array of uses of heritage and array of values. And I find that even heritage institutions, and particularly heritage institutions and conservators, do not know how to explain, do not know how to argument. And this is this need of arguments. And this need is also visible even on the national level. For example, in Poland, the National Strategy for Development of Social Capital says cultural institutions and heritage are important in the construction of social capital. And then it ends. So it doesn't explain how and why. And what interests me as a researcher out of academic curiosity, but I think what is important is not that we say it is important for whatever number of reasons, by how, in what ways, what are the mechanisms that make it important. And on the other hand, while doing research, what this is a kind of personal experience, but also from literature, is that as we do research among people, for example, surveying them, making questionnaires about how they find different heritage properties, if they're happy or not about it, if they accept them, whatever, we not only learn about the social preferences, which kind of backs up the decisions, but we also make people more sensitive to some things that they didn't know before, they didn't even think about it before. And this may be an important part of this valuation practice, not only producing evidence, but making people wonder, oh, they're asking me this question, now what does it mean? Have I ever wondered if I have a nice, let's say, palace in a park with public access, what do I gain by having it? Because people take some things for granted, and only if they're asked, they may say, oh, actually, oh yes, it does cost money to have this green lawn available for me, for example, with a nice view over the heritage property. So this is this, I think, awareness raising motivation could be very important, to raise public awareness. And I think at least in Poland it's still very low, or people don't think about it this way yet. They may say it costs and it's national identity, that's for sure. Other justifications are harder to, maybe it's good if it's commercialized and sold to tourists, but to make the next step, how do I use it every day, it's a bit different.
I often think also of how much we are supporting creative economy, designers, and this quickly growing economy to interact with the cultural heritage, and very often in Central Europe, not so much, because like we split the two of them, and But I see it as a way to support also creation of new small businesses, and those small and medium enterprise are important for the state growth. So for me, it's not contradictory, but we just need to find the right also tools to reconnect these two sectors, which sometimes they feel not concerned by cultural heritage. They think it's the matter of the states too often.
One final comment. Yep, very good.
I think one of the important things is how do we, this is a question somewhere, but how do we have that dialogue between citizens and experts which results in a common value of heritage? That seems to me to be incredibly important. I take issue with Kate, one term that Kate used about, she used DNA in the UK. I don't think it's anything to do with DNA. I think everybody in the world cares about their heritage, but history and culture enables people, or what's the opposite of enable? But it either promotes people's engagement or it doesn't. One of the interesting things I think in Britain over the last whatever many years it is of the Heritage Lottery Fund, is that it has brought about that dialogue that I've spoken about. Because the Heritage Lottery Fund does not set out to tell people what heritage they will fund. It asks people to apply for funding for something they define as their heritage. Then somebody has to make a judgment about whether they give funds to it or not. And that's a process of dialogue. And my question is, that's just one way of having that dialogue, but how do you encourage that dialogue? Because the social value of heritage comes out of expertise, but also out of what everybody values.
Which expertise are we speaking? Because the users have their own expertise as users, and so that's for me what is the most interesting. Like also to put the usual inhabitants in the situation of experts of their own story. They are in the power to tell their story in a wider context. So I really very often take my role just to offer them the platform where they can prepare their story. But when they prepare their story and want to present it, for instance, to tourists, then they need experts to just check out if the things are right, if to put back the things in the context. So it's for me then the dialogue is then really interesting, like when they are the one knocking at the door of the Heritage Institute in the city, then they are the one asking for more information, so looking at so in the course now we are preparing for community guides. They have part about research that they need to go to archive and to complete, so they will of course see the experts. They have also course with artists where they are all to tell the story a little bit in a different way. They have a course where they go to knock on the doors to find other people that can have some things to put there. So I mean, we need to create platforms where they meet, but they should be the one in power in that platforms, not the experts. If not, then they are not speaking. They're tech.
My response would be, well, I agree about the DNA. I think it's raising the sensitivities, raising the awareness. Again, it's this being able to talk about beauty. That I think it helps people articulate that affinity that they feel with the place, that sense of belonging, and so on. I think one of the tools that we do have there is Heritage Open Days. You know, I mean, we use it all the time because in 4 days this year we had 3 million visitors. I mean, that's up 1 million. I don't know how they calculated that, but anyway, it's a nice figure. But apparently, 3 million visitors over 4 days is quite phenomenal. Now, those are the 40,000. I think we have 40,000 people organising, and 4,000 or 5,000 events. I don't know. It could be the other way around. But actually, those are the local people being experts, aren't they? Because they are actually explaining their own heritage to their community. And so you don't have that difference between the local and the expert. They're combined. And I think it's a very good example, and we use it all the time to show public appetite for local heritage.
exactly. It must be something about awareness, about education. Well, thank you very much. Thank you, our guests, for taking the time and joining us here for the debate. Thank you, everybody for coming here tonight to the ACC. I would like to invite you tomorrow also for the lecture by Professor Gregory Ashworth. It will be at 6 o'clock downstairs in the conference room. This time it will be simultaneously translated also into Polish, so probably if you know someone who would like to listen to a lecture in Polish, please bring them with you. And well, I hope to see you tomorrow. Thank you very much again. Thank you and good night.